pages, save it, publish it, and then when the user opens up the page, that's not the landing page he sees. So what you can do right now is say, I want to set page number 1 as my landing page. Just do a right click and hit landing page, set as landing page. And then you will see this little house icon that you see next to one, which tells you that this is your landing page. And another way you could do that is one, can go into settings, go to page information, and then you have this toggle icon which says set as landing page. So these are two ways to set a page as a landing page. I am going to surely use this feature all the time. And then something that I noticed while I was playing around with this feature was move to, like you can move the page left, right, front, or back by single clicks. I'm not sure if it's a new feature or something Microsoft released secretly, but just want to let you know, like say if you have, say, around 15 pages. It includes tooltips and a couple of hidden pages you were experimenting with visuals, and then you suddenly decide you want to move pages. The current way you do is just keep scrolling. You drag and drop it. Now imagine if there are 15 to 20, it's going to have enable your move icon. So basically, you will have to keep pressing these arrow marks to navigate to that page. But now what you could do is say I have page number 0, which I want to move on in the front. You can just do a right click, move to front. Just by a single click, you will be able to move the page to the first wherever you want. So that's first update. Moving on to the second update, visual calculations is being used, but was in preview, but now it's generally available. For those who do not know what visual calculations are, basically you can do calculations on a visual level. Quick example here, say I have my year, I have my average life satisfaction values. Now you want to quickly do a quick analysis and you want to find out the difference between the current year and the previous available year. Now, for that, obviously, you can go ahead and write a DAX. But if since I told you that I'm just doing a quick analysis, just want to play around with this visual, I can go to visual calculation, and then you have a couple of predefined calculations. For example, running some percentage of parent versus previous next first. Even for demo purposes, I'm just going to hit this. What I want to do is just compare my life satisfaction value with the previous available year. So
Hey
here I
Lakshmi,
can just,
we're not seeing
yep.
changes on your screen share right now. We're
Oh,
still seeing a blank page.
oh, that's weird. Just give me 1 second. Let me reshare my screen. Probably stop sharing. Yes. Do you see visual calculations now?
Not
yet on my end.
It's still loading for me.
Give me 1 second. I'll switch off my camera. Let me know when you see it.
Hmm.
Is it
Still,
is is it
still
is
not
it
yet.
is it visible?
Nope, not yet.
Nope. Okay. Let me just switch my screen. Just a second. Yeah, I am sharing my screen.
There we
Okay,
go.
I can see
Visible
it
now?
now. Mm-hmm.
Oh, finally. Okay. So I'm sorry about that. So I was talking about visual calculations. The way you could add a visual calculation is click on your visual, hit new visual calculation. You have a couple of predefined calculations, or you could even write your own custom calculation. I'm just going to click on versus previous. You see how on clicking versus previous, I automatically have a predefined syntax that I can modify according to my values. So here I'm just going to use my life satisfaction value, hit OK, and then back to the report. You see now how it just did a quick subtraction and tells me what my previous value difference was. So this is how you do visual calculations, and now it's generally available. So feel free to play around with it. And then custom totals, I think something that I showed you 2 months back. was in preview. They've finally made it generally available. Quick demo of that is, for example, I have my years and I have my life satisfaction values. Let's do it. Average life satisfaction values. By default, the total is also going to be an average. But say, no, you want to see something else. Say you want to see a maximum or you want to see a minimum or a sum. You can go ahead and change those custom values. For example, now for this demo, I'm just going to make it sum. You will be able to see the sum of all these values. And then say you want to change this wording from total to sum. You can go to settings, go to totals, and just go ahead and change your label. You could do that. So this is also generally available currently. Moving on is column with you can change or fix or define the width for your columns. For example, here I have a table visual with a couple of columns here. Things you could do is one, I can enable fit to content. So according to my content value, you see how everything is compressed. And then something that was launched a few months back was grow to fit. So according to the visual size, your columns get adjusted. Something that came up today was fixed width. You can fix your widths. For example, I can fix a default width as 150 or whatever you want. So that way, no matter what you do, it's always going to stay 150. Now, I can specifically custom fix my width of the particular column. For example, the enrollment column, I do not want 150 because I have a lot of space here. You can enable custom width here. You see how once I enable custom width, all the column headers get picked up here. And then I can play around. For example, for the enrollment, we can fix it to 100 or let's make it 110 and everything else is 150. But then you see, like computer science is hidden. So I can go around and play with my program level and then maybe 250. Oh, sorry, it was not program level, it was program. And then make it 200. So now this is one of the feature where you can play around with the widths of each and every column individually. Moving forward, there's a preview feature, which is a new get data experience. Remember how when we used to click get data, we had a different screen pop up. Now there's a preview feature, which kind of gives you a unified view of everything on a single screen. I'm not sure if I'm a fan of it yet, but just to give a quick overview. So when you click on choose the get data, you're going to get a screen like this where you have all your data sources on the top. Clicking on view more will give you a more beautified version with icons. You can obviously go ahead and filter, go ahead and search. Then you're going to have your recent data information. So just giving a quick overview gives you the name of your PBIX files, gives a good information about the source type you're using, when was it last used. Moving on, one link catalog. I don't think I might. Yeah, I have something. Okay, so all your semantic models, everything in your Fabric workspace can be pulled over here. One quick thing I liked here is I can quickly create a blank table on the spot in the get data view, and then you can even put in a blank query. So I think I'm going to spend some time to get used to it, but this is a preview feature. Also, quick information, if you play around with it and you have any comments, they have this little smiley icon on the top, which is a feedback icon. When you play around it, go ahead, send your feedbacks. The team will surely look into it. And then moving forward, we have set the default format string local. So pretty interesting. What you could do here is now you can have a report setting to display, say, the dates and the numbers in a specific local, and that will be regardless of your browser settings. Say your browser settings is USA, so your date format is always going to be month, date, year. Now, what you can do is on a report level. So if you see here, you go to your settings, go to regional settings. On your report level, you can choose the local. For example, I choose India. So the date format in India is month, year. So if someone from in like even if a person from US is going to open it, that particular report is going to show the Indian format. So Basically, regardless of your browser settings, you will be able to see the dates and numbers in the format that you set. Quick thing to note is this setting affects only the report. So how the values are displayed in the visuals is going to be affected. It will not change anything on the semantic model level. So if you're going to play around with the user culture DAX, it is still going to return your browser setting. So quick thing to note on that. And then moving forward to 7. Yep. Okay. This is a pretty interesting update. So I was just playing around with it. So you know how we have a new slicer, which is the input slicer, right? Most of the time I use this input slicer for textual values. Say if I have a list of students and I want to pick and choose a particular student, I tend to use this. Now it also supports numeric values. And by numeric values, it's not just that you can filter it according to the numbers. Like say I do 2013, it gets filtered by 2013. You could do things like this. I can do 2013, comma 2023. Oh, I press full stop, sorry, 13, comma 2023. So, it just worked sometime back. Oh, no, never mind. So when I do 2013 and 2023, I can see things separately like this, or I can play around with the ranges too. Say 20, I want all the years more than 2022. Now you will be able to play around with the data like this as well. So this is one of the updates on the input slicers. Moving on, a very, I think a much needed feature was the text box formatting. Sometimes what happens is we type out text in Word or you already have the text formatted. When you copy paste this in Power BI, the indentations, the formatting settings were not copied exactly like it was. So now they've made sure that if you format, so if you see here, I have bold, I have my indentations, different type of indentations, I have bullets, I have different colors. So now if I copy this and paste it in a Power BI text box, I get it the same way it is formatted in your Word, Excel, or wherever. So that's one good formatting. Another interesting feature that I found out was version history. Did not play around with it, but I just want to share about it. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Okay. So what version history does is first, it is available for people who play around with Power BI files saved to OneDrive or SharePoint. Make sure this particular setting is enabled in your preview features. Only then this is going to work. What it does is on the top, you have this particular pop-up bar. On clicking, it'll tell you your name, it'll tell you your location. If you upload your file to OneDrive, it'll give you a small button which says View Version History. So if you see in this bad screenshot, you have this version history. Where did it go? Yeah, you will have this button called version history. On clicking that, you will get your version history. That will include things like what your previous versions were, who modified it, when was it modified, what the version number was. One interesting feature is when you click on that older version, right, it actually opens up the older version in a new Power BI window for comparison or reusing. And I haven't tested it out yet, but I think this is really a cool feature for all of us to use. And yep, that's pretty much it on the new updates for Power BI.
Awesome.
Mhm.
The
Thanks,
ability to put
Lakshmi.
them side by side is without having to roll back to the previous version. That's pretty like a revolutionary idea, like a utilization of OneDrive, because I don't think there's a way that you can do that with almost any other thing. Like if you want to look at a previous version of a Word doc, you basically have to roll it back, right?
Right. It's like Git, right? Like you're
Yeah.
looking at the
Yeah.
diffs.
Not
That's
exactly,
awesome.
because like Git will actually tell you what's changed. It looks like with this,
True.
you're going to have to find what's changed by just looking at them side by side. But still, if you don't have Git, this is about as close as you can get without having that.
Nice. Awesome. Thanks, Lakshmi. I know that was last second because to those that didn't know, they published an article saying, here's the feature summary, and then they took it away. And I think they just published it today again, and actually did some good sleuthing to find that and all the new features. Awesome. All right, so I'll go ahead, start sharing again over here. This works, and we'll roll forward. So a couple of announcements. So next month's meetup will be an office hours event, again, every other month. In July, we have something that I hope is special to everybody here. Microsoft actually is offering to provide resources and host study group sessions for their user groups. And so we're taking them up on that offer, and we're going to have a study group session for the PL 300 and DP 600 exams in the July meetup. I strongly recommend, if you're interested in the exam or you're trying to develop Power BI skills, come to that. There's going to be a lot of great resources, practice exams, and everything there where we'll go through. And yeah, you'll be able to learn more about that and hopefully prepare yourself a little better for those exams. I have 2 folks on my team that just took the PL 300 and passed, and I would strongly recommend everybody, at least on this group, if you're actively involved with Power BI in any capacity, to take either the PL 300 or DP 600. It's a great professional development opportunity. Okay. And then, as always, right? Hey, post in our Slack channel. The Slack channel is dry, as the kids say. So let's, please feel free to reach out. If there's any open positions, or you're looking for something, or you have any questions about Power BI or any feedback that you'd like from folks, please feel free to reach out on that Slack channel, right? It's available for us, and it's free, and hopefully it's available at your institution. And then if you're interested in presenting, please let us know, right? As I said, July is going to be this planning or the studying session, and then we'll have in August another office hours, and then September at this point is quote unquote wide open. It's wide open. If you want to present, great. We have some ideas for September, but we'll always take some volunteers as well. And then, as always, after this, I just started recording this slightly after Lakshmi started, so it'll catch up there. But we will be uploading this to YouTube, so we'll be sending the link out via the Meetup platform. You'll see an email come from there within the next couple of days. And yeah, RSVP to the next meeting if you haven't already. So, without further ado, let's get to the presentation. So, put your questions in the chat window. I'm actually going to be putting a poll up right when I go to this next slide in the chat window. I'd like you to answer that. It's going to be asking, hey, what are you interested in learning more about? We can dynamically shift the focus of this conversation, spend more time on X instead of Y if enough people answer. But we have a lot of content here that we're going to go through. The purpose of this is, we're going to post this or send it out to others too, because there's a lot of slides here that I think are really helpful for our user group to understand the different things that we'll go through here. So there's some good resources, so we'll send that out. But yeah, answer that question I'm going to pose in the chat in about 5 seconds, and that will help guide this. But let me give you some background. We talked as co-organizers of this group, and we said, hey, there's been a lot of people that are either new to Power BI, they have some questions about it, right? And so we figured we'd share our knowledge, at least our experiences, with the whole group, and just talk about all the things we wish we knew when we started with Power BI, right? Because it's a journey, right? You learn the skills as you go on, but we figured we'd share some of those pitfalls and some of those valuable things with you all today. So first one, I'm going to actually put this in the chat, so I'm going to try to talk while I'm building this poll out. But the first one is, in my opinion, data modeling, right? Data modeling is important, incredibly important when it comes to Power BI. One of the things I have up here, and we'll walk through these, but one of the topics that I put here is don't, quote, tableau your Power BI report. And this comes from me. This is something I say, not to disparage Tableau in any way, but I came from a Tableau background, came over to Power BI, and that is something that was a bit of a learning curve for me. And I know there's a couple folks that have been on our calls before that are in the same boat. They go from Tableau to Power BI, completely different platforms, different ways in which you build the reports in there. And what I mean by don't tableau your Power BI report is we have to focus on modeling first. Focus on what is your data model going to look like, your semantic model going to look like in the back end of your report? How is that going to feed into the different visuals you want to create, the different measures you want to create? What's the relationship there? Many to one, one to many, all of those there. Whereas in Tableau, really, there's different data sources you can have, right? However, the data modeling isn't as, I would say robust as it is in Power BI. And so it became an afterthought. You can create calculated fields. You can have all different sorts of things. We'll get into that a little later, but that would be my one huge tip is if you're coming from a different platform, not just Tableau, that's my experience. If you're coming from, Click or coming from Looker or anywhere else, don't try to say, hey, I need to fit everything I did and all the practices I did in this other platform into Power BI. You will only get frustrated. That is it's not a best practice. Learn the best practices with Power BI and move forward that way. The one thing I do say with folks is if you're trying to dig a hole, you don't want to get a hammer. Sure, you can carve out a hole, right, with the end of the hammer and do that, but it's not the best tool for that. So don't try to make Power BI your hammer if you need a shovel, right? Something like that. So just understand what the weaknesses are there. And then there's also other things. I don't know. There's a next slide that we'll go through here, but if anybody else wants to chime in about, Power Query versus Power BI or the star schema, that will be helpful while I put this poll in the chat real quick for everybody. Anyone? Bueller? Hold on. All right, hold on. I'm putting this poll in the chat. So please answer this poll. This is, what are you most interested in learning about? It'll update in real time. You can see that as we go there. All right, so with layers. So what do I mean by layers, right? So I'm gonna just click this. Power Query versus Power BI. Understanding where things should happen. And so you see the quote down here. It has, data should be transformed as far upstream as possible and as far downstream as necessary. That's by Matthew Roach. It's called Roach's Maxim. The next slide I'll go through in more detail, but this is very important to understand. So what you need to understand in a nutshell is you can load all your data in here. Let's not create every calculated column and every piece of logic and have it be stored within this report. It's a bad practice, to put it bluntly. You don't want all of your business definitions and key KPIs to be stored in a single report, right? Let's have it stored elsewhere, which we'll get to in the next slide. But spoiler alert, it'll be in the source system. Let's store that at the source, so that way it's reproducible, it's consistent, and then it's governable there. The other thing I have here is star schema. So if you're not aware what a star schema is, this isn't necessarily, this can technically be one, but think of a star, right? In the center of your star, you have a fact table, which is really where you design your measures around and everything there. It's who knows what the granularity could be, but you have your fact table, and then around that, you create a star, right? You create a star with dimensions. So let's say you have a fact term enrollment. So there's one record per student per term that they're enrolled. And then you have different IDs. Let's say you have gender ID, right? You have school ID. And then on the outside of that fact table in the data model, you have dim school and dim gender, or whatever demographic variable you'd like to use. And then you relate on those IDs. It's a very simple star schema, but that's a star schema, and that really helps organize things. It helps, from what I understand, the Vertipack processor in the back end of Power BI to really implement your DAX measures and columns if you want to, but DAX measures there within Power BI, and helps you understand how that schema fits together. You can then have those dimensions be related to other facts if you really want to, if you had to bring those in as well. So that way you're not duplicating data, bringing everything in, and it helps normalize things a little bit. And then I was going to share this, but we probably won't have time, but TMDL and DAX view. Anybody who's in VS Code right now or understands, can get into VS Code, there's an extension, Fabric Studio, that you can use. It connects to your connected or your published Power BI semantic models up in the Fabric platform. You can connect to those, bring in the code underlying the data model, so like tables or measures or anything, that's the TMDL, tabular model definition language. And then you can utilize GitHub Copilot or any AI if you really want to dynamically say create measure descriptions. I did that this morning. I said, hey, from this semantic model, there's like 15 measures that I had up here. I told it, hey, just can you create descriptions for these? It dynamically generated these descriptions based on what the DAX was for each measure. Put that up there, and then you can push those changes to the service if you really want to, and now they're done. So it didn't change the DAX itself. It just added measures, added some metadata there, so that it was helpful. But you can change the DAX. You can change all sorts of things with that. And so that's one way I think TMDL's really taken off when it comes to administration and agentic capabilities within Power BI. But also, kind of a crude example here, but one thing that we did, if I had an example, I'd show you. I do want to get to the next slide, though, because it's important. But within Power BI, let's say you have a team of analysts, right? And then you have one analyst working on the admissions piece of this huge report. And then you have another analyst working on the enrollment piece of this big report. And they're two separate files, but you need to make them into one. Again, this is crude, but you can open up TMDL view, drag open different tables, or even the whole semantic model if you really want to. And then you can copy and paste that into a separate file. It brings over all your data sources. It'll have to refresh them, of course, if they're in import mode. But it'll bring them all over. And then you can copy and paste the actual visual elements there as well into another report. And everything, at least in my experience, just magically works. And that's using the TMDL view. That's it's allowed us to work together and collaboratively on different files and then bringing them into one. Again, it's a crude approach, but it has worked really well. So that's something that we've done as well. So before I move on to the next page, does anybody else want to share anything about data modeling?
I could point something out, and that's there's some discussion in the comments about how people talking about difference between SQL and DAX, and that there's some people talking about how DAX is difficult. And yeah, if you're coming from a background of SQL, DAX feels a little more arcane. There's something that feels like that. How is it that this very same code can produce different results in just different circumstances? So it does feel a bit more difficult if you're trying to think of it in a SQL way. But if you try to turn your brain and say, let's forget about SQL and think about DAX in the context of itself, rather than comparing it to other languages or thinking in Python or that sort of thing, it's much easier if you just kind of say, forget everything you know about other languages and study DAX from first principles. All that being said, if you do a good job with your upstream data preparation, you won't actually need to do a whole lot of DAX in your model. In your DAX, the DAX that you do add can be pretty simple. So if you do a good star schema, you're not going to need very complicated DAX. You can mostly get away with just your SumX and that kind of stuff. You may need like calculator or use relationship or things like that occasionally. But yeah, keep your model simple, and the DAX will be pretty easy to write. And somebody else mentioned that you can use AI to help write DAX. It's gotten much better if you save your Power BI file as a PBIP, which basically saves the source code for your report and your semantic model. Then the AI can actually go through that source code, and it can look at the actual structure of your model, and then it can use that information to help write better measures. So it's way better than asking ChatGPT like a generic question.
Awesome. Sorry, I was looking through the chat here. I love the chatter. I also love that T-shirt. As far upstream as possible. That's awesome.
Yep.
One thing I'll say, you'll notice there's going to be resources on the bottom right of this. So when we send the PowerPoint out, these are actually links to these resources. So, for those in the chat say DAX is difficult, here's a great book, The Definitive Guide to DAX. Feel free to read it.
That's the second edition, and there's actually a third edition that they recently came out with, and they did a complete rewrite. And I haven't actually read the third edition yet, but I'm told from people who know well enough that I would trust their opinion on it that it's actually much easier to read now than the second edition was. So if you read the second edition and you had a hard time with it, it might be worth going back and checking out this third edition to see if it's a little easier for you to understand.
Speaking of Roach, Matthew Roach, this next one. So this is, we mentioned Roach's maxim. Again, we wanted to provide resources or at least the visuals, right, for everybody to understand what we're talking about. Roach's maxim, we tried to visualize this right here. So I'm going to go through, I won't read it to you all, everybody can read, but level 1 at the source. So this is the source. Where do we store our data? In this case, in this example, we'll say it's the data warehouse, right? Or a database of some sort. This is where your permanent business logic stays. It has global rules there. It's applicable to multiple reports, not just one single one. So remember when I was talking before about if you have all of your crucial business logic stored in one report, that's not a good practice, right? Let's store that downstream at the storage level there. Level 2 is Power Query, right? So this is really mainly used for transforming, data cleaning, reshaping. If you need to pivot or unpivot, completely fine, right? But again, don't store your crucial business data within Power Query. That's all stored there. Let's store it at the storage level. And then level 3 is Power BI. Like, how are we reporting? How are we visualizing this? Measures are here, right? So one thing that we did, we calculated, say, retention rate. Retention rate at our institution can be calculated at many different levels. So it doesn't really it makes sense to create a DAX measure on a report using the base level data that we've got from our level 1 storage source. We don't want to, I mean, you can create aggregate tables if you want, but it would have to be aggregated at every single level that somebody would have to potentially look at with all the dimensions. And as you can see, that gets out of hand. It doesn't really make sense to do it that way. So we store it here. We can link dimensions to it, and then we can filter, slice, whatever we want based on the retention rate measure at the level 3 there. So hopefully that's a good example for everybody to follow there. But also like the flow of data. So we have here the flow of data. It goes from level 1 to 2 to 3. It's presented in level 3. But then the flow of lineage. So if somebody asks, hey, where does this measure come from? Well, we did this in level 2, and then this level 2 data came from level 1, and that's where it all stores. So it sort of goes down and then back up again if you want to really want to trace that there. So this is Roach's maxim. We've tried to visualize it in a way. So level 1, most efficient, widely usable. Level 2, balances usability and reusability. That's the Power Query steps. And then level 3 is it enables interactivity. So that's our reporting that we know and love, right? But that's the as far downstream as necessary and then as far upstream as possible, as you can see on the wonderful shirt that was linked there.
Fun fact related to the what you were mentioning about the multidimensional aspect. I don't know who has been around here long enough to know about this, but before Power BI tabular model, there was this thing called multidimensional models where you actually did pre-calculate aggregate tables for every single possible combination of all the different dimensions in your model. So if you had 3 dimensions and you had like 5 measures, you had you did the I forget what the math is to figure out how many different versions of that but it's like once you combine them all in combinations of, okay, you've got one dimension with another dimension. That's one combination. You add the 3 of them together, and then you add like B and C together, and you add A and C together, and like every single combination of all of those, you have to recalculate all of those measures, and they did all of that and pre-stored all of those values in the model. So you can imagine that those models were really huge in memory. On top of that, the language you use to query those models was MDX, and if you think DAX is hard, you should try reading MDX sometime. It'll break your brain. So maybe don't do it on a busy day and wait until you got like some time on a weekend or something. Anyway,
Nice.
Sorry, I thought it'd be worth a little bit of a history lesson there to let people know that like we actually have it really good now compared to the way it used to be.
I was gonna say, I just put something in the chat.
Yes, yes, absolutely. That is exactly what it feels like to try to mentally conceptualize a multidimensional model. But it's like you ever see those diagrams or like an animation of a tesseract where it's like a 4-dimensional
Oh,
cube?
oh my gosh.
It's that, but like there's way more than 4 dimensions. Try to imagine a cube in 13 dimensions, right? Like and then you have to try to figure out a way to write code about that. We really have it very good today compared to the way that used to be, like about 10 years ago. So,
wow.
Yep.
Awesome. I mean, awesome to know. Maybe not awesome to experience, although that was probably a heck of a time.
Yep. Fun fact though, that like today you can still write MDX queries that will get data out of a Power BI tabular model. So MDX queries are valid for getting data out of Power BI, and that's actually how, if you use Excel to connect to a semantic model in Power BI, Excel sends an MDX query when you do a pivot table. And so there's it's and you could, if you wanted to, you could develop your own application that sends MDX queries to a Power BI semantic model. It's MDX, as far as I know, is actually like an open standard. So
nice,
fun stuff.
Awesome. So I'm looking at the chat or the poll results, and the majority chose data modeling. So I think, we started with that. I think that was a good call, but maybe we should flesh this out a bit more at future sessions, right? If everybody wants to know more about data modeling, there's a world of possibilities, right? How we can do that. So we should flesh that out and go forward with that. So feel free to take a screenshot of this if you want to, if this helps, communicate this. If I know sometimes there's office politics and stuff, but if you're having trouble, convincing others to store their data at, level 1 instead of in a report, feel free to use this as a resource, and hopefully that's helpful. Next one we wanted to talk about was security. I noticed nobody mentioned this, but I do want to, we do want to talk about it. Security is boring, at least to me, but it is necessary. It is not the fun thing to do, but certainly it's something we need to do. So we have here workspaces, apps, direct links. Oh my, it comes from I think the Wizard of Oz that popped into my head when we made that. So we have, workspaces versus apps and direct links and all of the different things. This, when I was new to Power BI, this was a pain point for me. It just didn't naturally come to me. I couldn't understand all the different layers and everything. It was confusing. It's gotten a lot better, obviously, as I have moved along in my career. However, if you're new, it's important to understand the distinctions. So the next slide will go over some of that. Report security. How do you secure your reports? I'm going to give an example from internally to UM. I'm going to give you the pros and cons of that, but I'll go through some of that. Row level, object level security as well, something we can talk about. And then row level at the source layer, that's again what I'll be covering there. But some important things to remember. So masking is not security. What I even mean by that, right? So if you have certain logic in your report and it says, I don't know, to mask a value, right? Like, say you have social security numbers. Our team doesn't have access to this because we don't have access to social security numbers. We don't need it, and I'm fine with that. But let's say you do. Let's say you have access to SSNs and you're surfacing them on a report. For some reason, you need to surface the final 4, and you want to mask those. Those first however many numbers. I blanked on how many digits we have in a social. I shouldn't have done that. But you want to show the last 4, and you have some logic, and then it masks the first couple of numbers there. That's not security. Somebody could easily just download that Power BI report or access a semantic model and then pull that information, right? So the best approach there is to just simply say, hey, you don't have access to the data at all. It just doesn't service it. It's not even stored. Centralize your security. Try to do that. As report teams, we shouldn't be in charge of what data everybody sees and all of the security there. I know it's in an ideal world, we wouldn't touch it at all. I know we have to touch it in some places, but try to centralize that. Secure the data when needed. Underline this, when needed here. Not sometimes some institutions treat every piece of data as though it's stored in Fort Knox. When it doesn't need to be, right? If everybody has gone through their specific trainings, not all data should be secured the exact same way with very strict encumbering ways to see it. Use Azure AD groups. This is a big thing. If you have a report or an app for instance, that's surfaced to an audience of 30 some people, or X amount. Try to create an Azure AD group for that. So that way you update the Azure AD group there. It goes to the app. It goes to any other things you've created. Maybe you've created a SharePoint page that's only accessible to these people. Try to create Azure AD groups. It's easy to administer when you just have one spot to administer rather than multiple different spots. Audit the access too. This is another thing. If you are in charge of security, which I hope you're not, but if you are in charge of security at your institution, please ensure that you have a mechanism in place to audit access over time. At least here at UM, we have folks that change departments and therefore change roles. And we don't know that. We just don't get notified when every single person changes roles or anything there. So we do have mechanisms in place for that, but make sure you audit. Folks that have access should still have access. And then, of course, security is layered. There's so many layers to security, I feel like, but it's important to understand this. So that's why we're going to go through this next page here. Oh, and another resource. This links out to a YouTube page or a YouTube channel. So when you get that, you can go there. Another asset, hopefully you can screenshot or take and to better understand workspaces, apps versus direct links. Okay, so I won't read through every single piece, but in general, workspaces are meant to collaborate. So for developers, put all of your assets or your semantic models in workspaces and then surface them for end users via apps. And you can use audiences within those apps to do that. Oh yeah, and I just saw in the chat, I'll put it for the recording in a transcript. Disable publish to web. Just do it. So James can tell you a lot more about why to do that, but it basically exposes your data. It can expose your data. So please make sure you do that. But anyway, apps, distributing. So think of it like this. Workspaces, you collaborate and build and manage together within your team. Apps, you distribute those to your customers, right? Your end users, who's going to see this, and you can control the access there. And then direct links, I would never recommend using personally. It's very hard to audit direct links. You can give a direct link to somebody. It's the quick and easy way, but it's not governable. You will forget 2 years down the road that you gave that direct link and that person still has access directly to that report. I'll give an example here within UM. We have a very robust security setup at UM, which I will go over in the next slide. It's so robust, it's very complex. However, let's say we have folks they can see admissions data, but they're only allowed to see data if they're in a security group. Somebody's not in the security group, yet they're sending screenshots of a report that they're accessing that's behind that wall. And it took, a couple hours. We just could not figure out why in the world is this person accessing? How's this happening? They shouldn't be able to access data and all this. Well, they had a direct link. Somebody, for whatever reason, clicked the share button at the top of the report, copied the link, sent it to that person, and this person now had direct access to that. And so it was very hard to manage. I wouldn't recommend doing that. It's available. So, again, knowledge is power, just making you aware that this is available, but there are some downsides to it. So the practice we do typically is workspace for everything and then surface everything through an app for our end users to see and interact with on our Power BI reports. Any questions about this before we move forward? Okay. This next slide. So this is an interesting thing I wanted to cover. Again, an example from UM. I'll give you the pros and cons of this, but we implement at the source layer, think back to Roach's Maxim, level 1, what's called secure join tables. And basically, I'll in a nutshell, this walks you through what it is. This is an important thing, but I wanted to surface this in case this would be helpful for your institution for very specific use cases. So with secure join tables, what we have is we use PeopleSoft. In the PeopleSoft, we have in our ERP, we have what people should see, what their roles are, if they have access to the different levels, different schools and colleges, and if they have access to enrollment, admissions, student financials data, and so on and so forth. And then from there, this data, these security tables get imported into our data warehouse. The data warehouse then creates views on top of that. And then within these views, they will check if the person accessing this data if we publish a report in direct query and via a SQL query or a view we've created, it will check, hey, this is Jeff logging in. What does he have access to? It'll say, oh, he has access maybe to only our College of Arts and Sciences data. And then it will check within that view which rows have arts and sciences or whatever that dimension is it's checking, and then only return those rows they have access to. So it's a sophisticated row level security that we have here at UM. Sounds great in theory, right? It works, it does, but it gets very complex. It's very hard to administer and troubleshoot sometimes when users can't access certain data. It also requires that we use direct query for a lot of our reports. And when we have some of our beefier SQL queries or transformations, we try to push that to the source to create maybe a materialized table or something, a view there, but it still can take a while to load within our direct query report. So the reason I'm bringing this up is this is an option. This is something that you can do if you want to have security across multiple different SQL Server objects or objects within your database, not SQL Server. But I would recommend only doing it for specific use cases rather than a blanket statement across how you're going to administer security across your entire institution. So if you want to know more about this, I'm always happy to tell you more, but that's how we do security at UM at an enterprise level. There's a lot of downsides to it. However, we don't have to worry about security because it's handled by a centralized team. It all flows through here. We use direct query to source our reports, and we know if people, even if they have access to the report, the data won't load for them if they don't have access to it already, and they've already gone through that security process. All right, next one is gateway gotchas. So I think James has a lot to say about this, and I'll take over the chat here, James.
Yeah, sorry, I was doing a little bit of replying for the public-facing dashboards and reports. Like the argument for, pardon me, the argument for that as an exception to the don't use the publish to web feature. So I'll let you handle that in the chat there, Jeff. Pardon me. Gosh, I don't know what's going on right now. If we have a way to do a show of hands in here, is anybody here the tenant admin for their organization? Or a tenant admin for your organization? Okay, not seeing any hands. Oh, there we go. Got a hand. All right, cool. So it's an important thing to know, even if you're not actually the admin yet, you may at some point be given the responsibility to govern, even if you're not the full tenant admin, you might actually still have to administer gateways. So what is a gateway? You probably heard of things called a firewall, which is where you've got your campus has its own little internal network, and if someone's on the outside of your campus, say that they're somewhere in Japan or something like that, and they need to connect to your network, well, they can visit your website, but they can't connect directly to any of your like SQL servers on premises, or like your file shares or other things that you've got in your computers that are within your network, and that's because that firewall blocks their connection from coming in. Well, that very same firewall that stops some random person from connecting to your internal assets in your organization also stops the Power BI service from just randomly connecting into your SQL Server databases, because your SQL servers have no way to know whether the incoming connection request is legitimate or not. So that's why we have firewalls. Well, what a gateway does is it uses a feature of networks where your firewalls will allow a connection to be made if it's an outbound connection. So if you're within your campus network and you need to go connect to some other place, the outbound connection will be allowed by your firewall. It's the inbound connections, the ones where it's like you didn't ask for it, some other place is asking for it. So what gateways do is the gateway software lives on your server, and the gateway software makes an outbound connection request to Microsoft's servers. And once that connection is live, it stays live. And then whenever the Power BI service needs to get data from your on-premises sources, it uses that same connection, and it basically does a reverse. It goes backwards to over that same connection, and it gets data from your from your on-premises data sources and pulls it up and then uses that to refresh the semantic models. So it's basically a way to punch a safe hole in your firewall that only works for just Power BI without having to talk to your network administrator or things like that. So as long as they allow outbound connections without firewall rules, and some places do have really strict firewall rules where they don't even allow outbound connections unless you explicitly allow them. But this basically makes it so the standard configuration for most firewalls is that you won't have to make a special exception for it. So that's what a gateway is. What is the difference between an enterprise gateway and a personal gateway? A personal gateway is where you install it on your workstation. So like your laptop, your company issued computer. Now it only works for you and your semantic models. And when you shut your laptop for the night, if Power BI tries to refresh your semantic model, it doesn't work because your laptop isn't there to answer the query. So what an enterprise gateway does is it basically allows you to install very similar software, but on a server that stays on 100% of the time. So that at 2 a.m. when your semantic models start refreshing, Power BI says, "Hey, SQL Server, I'm going to need some data from you," and basically it routes that query through the data gateway over to your SQL Server on-prem and says, "Okay, yeah, here we go," and brings the data up from there. So that's the big difference there. Enterprise gateways can be owned by like a group of people too. So like it could be more than one person can administer it. Enterprise gateway can also be used by multiple report authors. So if you have connections that you've created for, say, a given SQL Server, you've got, say, like you have your main data warehouse, and you have lots of analysts in your organization who need to use that same connection, and you've got like a service account that connects to that SQL Server so that individual people aren't saving their credentials in the semantic model settings. That service account connection can actually be saved as an easy shortcut for any analyst to connect to, and you need an enterprise gateway to do that. So there's another thing that gateways can do, and that is if you have a fair amount of data load coming through, it might be a little too much for a single server to handle. And so especially if you have this gateway software installed on a server that also has other duties. So a good idea is anytime you're installing enterprise gateway software is to try to get at least two separate instances, server instances. They can be virtual machines, they can be physical machines, but two separate computers that have their own workloads, and install the gateway software on both of them and make them part of a cluster. And that's what you would need the recovery key for, is if you want to add more gateways to a cluster, the very first gateway you add creates the cluster, and any you add after that, you use the recovery key to add it to the existing cluster. And then Power BI will do load balancing for you. So if it sees that one of the servers is a little busy, like it's processing a lot of stuff, its CPU and its RAM usage are really high, it'll automatically redirect those queries through the other server that doesn't have as much usage, and it'll use that server's capacity to, or not capacity, it's not really the same as Fabric capacity, but it uses its network resources and CPU and RAM resources to do those queries for your on-prem data. So I know that was a lot of really technical stuff there. If anybody has any questions about any of that, please feel free to ask in the chat. One thing I would normally have had to mention here is the fact that you used to have to keep track of your versions. You would have to go in every month. You'd have to upgrade your enterprise gateway. They've actually now created a way for you to upgrade your enterprise gateway without having to log on to the machines anymore. Now you can just go and click the upgrade button right there in the portal. So now you won't even have to have a special like remote desktop login to go on the server and upgrade so for those of you who are actually in the position of having to maintain this stuff, it's much easier to do now than it used to be. So save your recovery key when you create, even if you're just only doing a single node in your cluster from the beginning, save the recovery key anyway, because later on, if you do just decide you want to add a new node, if you don't have that recovery key, you have to create a whole brand new cluster, which means you have to redo all of your connections for all your existing stuff. So save it in your, if you have a password manager used for work, save it in your password manager and write it down and put it, like stick it to the back of a filing cabinet with a magnet or something. Anyway, that's all I have on the gateways.
Nice. And I noticed we're at like 2 minutes. We may have overestimated. We have a ton of content still, which is good for everybody here. We got a ton of stuff. And Ambreen, I think Ambreen had to drop off. Here, I'm looking. You there, Ambreen?
No, I'm
She's here.
here.
There she is.
I was late.
Hey.
Sorry.
So here, Ambreen, real quick, can you just bring up that you were going to talk about folders versus single files, right? So, and everything.
Yeah. So like years ago when I started, and this is my how I learned the things, how to do it the best way. So like how you can, when I started, I was basically using, I didn't had access to create the connect my files to my Power BI dashboard to the warehouse. So I was just using those flat Excel files. But then I feel like now I learned that if you, for some reason, do not have access to create the views, you do not have access to connect directly to the SIS system, what you can also do is like you can dump all your files in a folder and just ask Power BI to pick the files from the folder. So for every year, like term after term, like in fall 26, all you have to do is you just drop the fall 26 file and refresh, and then will automatically picks up. So you don't have to recreate the dashboard. You're not dependent on a single flat file. It's just gonna pick up, but you have to make the source as folder rather than a file. Um, Certain things that I learned with the file was like your file has to be the exact same columns. Even an extra space is gonna give a weird error that took me a long time to figure it out. I was like, I don't know what's going on, what this error means. So every column has to be structured the same way, worded the same way, very sensitive to the even the case sensitive. So it has to be in the same format coming term after term. But once you set it up, I've also used it for enrollment data, but I've also used it for my survey data, which I feel like was very complicated to build it the first time because I was using a flat file. But then I was just like moving forward in the terms, you just keep using the different term, just dropping the files and you can pick it up. So that was one. I feel like the best way to my preference for connecting the dashboard is basically to create the views, and as both James and Jeff mentioned, always do the cleaning on the upstream. So if you're really strong into SQL, everything I try to clean it up in my SQL and create a view and lock it there. I try to do maximum cleaning. Also, I feel like if it is by default, if you're a strong SQL writer, you're gonna do that cleaning and prefer to do it. And sometimes the DAX gets very complicated. But I feel like sometimes I use a balance of both. Some of it is much easier to do it and faster to do it in DAX compared to how much you're going to write in SQL. So I try to balance it. Sometimes I have used a shortcut of doing certain things in DAX, but then I realized it was faster to do it in DAX, but then at the end of the day, I have to um, redo certain things. So for example, like my source changed from directly connected to the prod. Now my connection was going through the warehouse. Everything was changed, but the source path changed. But every cleaning that I did in the Power Query or the view level stayed the same. But I did some shortcuts of creating certain groups, creating certain DAGs, and all those were broken. So I have to recreate those. So I learned my lesson, like always upstream, like try to do anything possible in Power Query level 2. But I had the very bad habit of creating the groups. I'm like, oh, that's faster. I'm just gonna collapse 5 of those things and call it this. And those groups were really destroyed when I have to do the change the source. So that those were some of the lessons I personally learned working with the I'm trying to think what else. Anything else I'm missing now? I think I covered most of it.
I think that's good.
Yeah.
I was going to say we have a lot more content. I mean, I could just flip through design, and I was going to do a template demo, but we wanted to go through that. Maybe we can bring this up on the June call with for our office hour, just briefly, just to go through some of that if it's necessary. But I know it's 3:03. It's past time. This went by really quickly, which is great. Hopefully this was helpful to everybody here. But as always, reach out to us, reach out to the group on the Slack. We don't have to wait till here. If you're having questions or have struggles, or you just want to know how others have implemented their Power BI reports and their structures, just reach out. We're a great group here, and we'll be able to answer those questions. So thank you all. We'll be in touch, and look out for the July session, especially that PL 300, TP 600 there. And we will talk soon. And then we'll send out the YouTube link once it gets uploaded, okay? Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.